Are we? Oh, yes.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Kaiju Masterclass. John DeSentis here with my good friend Erik Homenick, webmaster of AGENTS.org. And none of that matters because the guy that we have here today is an incredible composer. You know, some of you know him from his work on The Walking Dead, specifically with the connection of what we're doing at Kaiju Masterclass. You would know him more recently from the score to Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and so many more. So, Bear McCREARY, welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks for being with us, Bear. How you doing today? Doing
great. How's it been going so far?
Wonderful. Had a great interview with David Arnold this morning. Wonderful guy. We've had all sorts of other panels going on throughout the day. We just had a good one on Expo 70, which took place in Japan. Which was really informative and fun. But overall, it's been great, and we're happy to have you. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Of course. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So obviously, you know, we're here to not only talk about your score to Godzilla, King of the Monsters, but also just kind of like, we really want to kind of get into film scoring in general and just the processes and really just the nuts and bolts of what it takes to like do something as big as a score to Godzilla, King of the Monsters. So I guess I'd like to start off by simply asking, when did you get involved? When did you get the phone call for King of the Monsters?
Pretty early on. They had not fully cast. They certainly hadn't shot a frame. So, I mean, I got the call, would have been, I want to say 2017, I think. But yeah, I've known director Michael Dougherty for years. And in fact, maybe even 8 or 10 months before I got the call, we were at the Hollywood Bowl together, and we were talking. Oh, what are you up to? What are you up to? And he's like, oh man, I'm working on this Godzilla script. And I'm like, oh my God, what? I'm freaking out. And so we talked for 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm like, Mike, like, dude, I love that you're working on this, but like, who's directing? And then he realizes that he'd skipped over a part of this. He was like, Bear, I'm directing it. And then I was like, oh my God, my mind was already blown, So yeah, Mike and I were just pals, we had met years ago. And so he called me then, 6 or 7 months later and asked if I wanted the gig scoring King of the Monsters. And of course I said yes.
So, well, it's actually kind of funny you mentioned that, because I remember I was a fan of his, obviously, from when he did Trick or Treat, and then obviously I really liked Krampus a lot. And I remember an interview he did with Rue Morgue back in like 2010, and it was I think it was around 2010 or something like that, where they were covering Trick or Treat, and he said something to the effect of, I can't speak much about my next project, but let's just say I've been a Godzilla fan my whole life. So I thought that was right after Legendary had sort of announced that they had the rights. And I thought that he would end up scoring Godzilla 1, which obviously, as we know, went to Gareth Edwards. But it's kind of cool to see that come back to him. So.
Absolutely. And, how he landed that gig, we'd have to ask him, but you definitely get a sense that Krampus, he's in that orbit. He obviously knows the genre. Obviously, he knows the character. But, I think Krampus.
Did we have you, Bear?
It was a monster movie on a scale,
okay.
So he was so obviously the right choice.
Oh, Bear, I think your signal cut out a little bit there. Do we still got you? Hello, sir. Bear, do we still got you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Now I can hear you. Yeah, that's all right. It's funny. Great. When I did the test with I think Miki yesterday, he had mentioned that that your internet could be kind of a little bit haywire. So we anticipated this, and it's okay. So Erik, is there anything you would like to get in to ask Bear?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bear, again for being here. And as you're probably aware, I'm the webmaster of McCREARY, so I work very closely with the composer's family. And I had the great fortune to meet you briefly at Comic-Con last year, so that was really a great moment for me. I'm just very curious about when discussions came about to what extent were you guys planning, talking with the director Doherty, to start incorporating some of the classic themes? Because in the Alexander Desplat score for the Gareth Edwards film, there was absolutely no reference to the classic themes, at least not explicitly. It was a completely original score. So at what point did this discussion come into play?
The true answer to this question, it's so short and simple and boring. It came into question immediately. I mean, it was really we got there so quickly, and we both wanted to do it, that there really was to use.
I think we froze again. Hey, Bear, do we still got you? Hang on, your signal's catching up. There it is. So we'll just roll with this every now and then. If you freeze up, we'll just kind of.
Well, hold. I might have better results with a hotspot on my phone if I log out, connect to that. Is that worth trying? If this is going to keep going?
I think so.
Yeah, we can.
Let me try.
That, sure.
I'm going to close out. Click on the same link. Give me 60 seconds.
Okay. Sure. All right. We'll be right back with Bear. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, these things do happen sometimes. we have technical difficulties and issues.
Seems to be so since we're talking about a reoccurring theme with our composers today.
I like what you did there.
That's right.
I like what you did there. But it's okay. We're gonna roll with it. And looks like Bear's back in. Let's bring him back to the. All right, now let's see if we get a little better out of this.
Okay, you guys can hear me?
Yes,
so far,
sir.
so good.
So far, yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. Like, I can totally understand what you're asking. I'm going to spin your question a little bit.
Cool.
Because you're asking, like, when did that conversation begin? The decision to use those themes was instantaneous. I mean, we knew immediately that we wanted to use them. The question, the real question is, how do we use them? And that was the more challenging conversation, or challenge that led to more interesting conversations, I should say. That do we use them as an homage? Do we reference them explicitly? Do we incorporate them in a truly and incorporate them and modernize them? And that's where I fell down on that side of the debate. I was thinking that, look, if you're going to do this, don't make it a quote. Don't make it an homage. Not going to name names, but there have been a lot of really great IP reboots over the last 10 years, 15 years, the original theme song that clearly is viewed as hokey or campy or whatever is done in the end credits or after the credits, or it's done as a mobile ringtone, or it's in the movie, but it's like they're holding their nose.
Exactly.
And I didn't want to do that. I was like, look, if we're going to use these themes, they're the themes. I'm not gonna like wink at the original themes and then like write another theme for Godzilla. Like, there's not enough emotional space in the movie for that. So what that meant was, obviously, we got to take these themes that the studio and maybe even audiences at large view through the lens of what the 50s and 60s sounded like, and modernize it and make it so that if you knew that music, you would freak out. But if you didn't know that music, it would just sound like a modern blockbuster score in 2019. So that was the philosophy going into it.
It's a very interesting word you're using, modernization. So how do you modernize somebody else's music that was written, decades earlier? Modernize it, but as you said, don't quote it or wink at it, but keep it authentic.
Well, it's funny, you'd mention that, because it's really not my first rodeo with this. I faced this challenge with Stu Phillips' classic Battlestar Galactica theme that I reimagined. I put a spin on Brad Fiddel's Terminator theme for Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. And in each time, I approached that challenge in a different way. This was by far the most challenging, because I really wanted to use these themes as completely modern, colors. Really, you just have to get under the hood and use your instincts and taste as a composer and listen to what is it. You got to find the elements in there that worked at the time and figure out how they worked and why they worked, and then just do that again in a modern color with kind of a muscular blockbuster kind of orchestration and approach. And also, really in some ways it's like I'm talking about changing it, but I didn't. That's the cool thing. Did it sound like a 2019 blockbuster? Yeah. The production was there. The orchestra was massive. Mm-hmm. I used every tool at my disposal as a composer. But the fundamental approach didn't change at all. It was old school. That it's like, well, when Godzilla shows up, he gets a hero fanfare. He gets the Godzilla march. I'm not trying to make it dark and brooding like Dark Knight. It's like, no. We're going to, on the surface, make it sound better, but its function, and I don't even mean better. I just mean modern. But you know what I mean? That that the way those themes were used was very literal and very emotional. That, here comes the bad guy, here comes the good guy. We're not playing with sort of moral ambiguities. We're having fun with that. And Doherty and I were really aligned from day one that Godzilla King of the Monsters needed to evoke that.
Well, it's interesting because just sort of like, so you've got like the A part, which is like the bum, ba, da, da, bum, bum, and then you go into like more of the heroic Godzilla March, which actually, was the main title of the original film and wasn't even the theme for Godzilla. It just became so associated with him that the composer just like gave it to him. So
well, in a weird way, right? That the character Godzilla evolved so that he fit that music.
Yes.
Because in the original film, that was for the heroes, the military, right? Was where you heard that upbeat march. And then I just wonder, Eric, maybe you would know, like, I just wonder if there was ever a conscious decision to go, oh, Godzilla's the hero now. Why don't I just use the heroic music from before and just transplant it onto him now?
Well, yeah, I think that's just something that happened completely organically. No one planned for that, but it's amazing how that theme just sort of resonated in the Japanese public. I mean, it's like the the Star Wars theme here. Everybody knows that music in Japan, whether you're a Godzilla fan or not, you know that music. It is such a cultural thing over there, and I think you're absolutely right, Bear. It's amazing how, as the character evolved, he sort of, as he evolved towards being more of a hero or an anti-hero, he really sort of grew into that music. It was like an inevitability. And eventually even the composer said, okay, that's his theme now.
Yeah. And I think the first time we actually heard that theme represent Godzilla was in Terror of Mechagodzilla. That was the final film of the original series. And I guess because Godzilla was so firmly a hero at that point, and Ifukube had kind of been away from the franchise for a few years, I guess maybe he just thought, well, this kind of fits. So I would say you're probably spot on with that assessment there. So now the other aspect of it was not only do you kind of bring back and update Ifukube's Godzilla theme, but you sort of bring back the Yuji Koseki Mothra theme. And there have been a lot of composers who've done Mothra. Ifukube himself has written plenty of original tracks for Mothra, but that original Koseki theme seems to really always keep coming back. And so like just kind of the interesting thing about your version of it was that so in Godzilla's theme you have like sort of all these chants and like these vocal percussive moments, which I want to talk about a little bit later, but Mothra's theme, which is originally a vocal piece, you chose to just stay strictly instrumental. So let's talk about that.
Well, a lot of it came down to I keep calling it real estate because that's how I think of film, that like a film has moments that you can place music. And on a practical level, the way Mothra's scenes played out, the idea of having lyrics, somehow we tried it out. I mean, we did record vocals, and we found that it didn't really fit. It started to crowd the soundscape and crowd your brain because we had vocalizations for Godzilla, we had vocalizations for Ghidorah. And it was almost like, I mean, it was almost like overloading your brain to also have vocals for Mothra. And ironically, then there were discussions at some point, like, well, do we use this theme without the vocals? I mean, it's so iconic that it's two parallel harmony female vocals. But you know, I've always loved that tune, and Doherty did as well. So as that idea evolved, it became more choral, it became more orchestral, and sort of play. You know, I thought that sort of fit in with the role that Mothra was playing in King of the Monsters.
So, well, it's interesting. Speaking of vocalization, Erik, you had a particular subject that you wanted to talk about. As far as you know, where I'm going to go with it. Just take it away.
Right. So, you know, something that I find very interesting about King of the Monsters is that the theme of sound is so prevalent throughout it with the orca, you know, a means of using sound and pitches and certain tonalities to communicate with the monsters. And I find this theme so interesting because the composer Akira Ifukube he himself had a very special connection to nature, and he believed that you could use sound as a means of communicating with animals. In 1957, he wrote an article, and I don't know how accurate any of this scientific information is in it, but he claims that if you approach a swarm of mosquitoes, the swarm is all buzzing at the same pitch. And if you hum that same pitch, the mosquitoes will come towards you because they recognize the sound. He says this goes back. He says because insects are, you know, go all the way back to prehistoric times. This is a truism that dates back millions and millions and millions of years. He said that if you play music for cows enjoy good music and they'll give better milk. And I just find that this theme of using sound as a means of communicating with the monster, a communicative bridge between man and nature. I wonder if at any point that, you know, I know it's kind of a deep philosophical question, but I wonder if any point during the filming or during the production, if you thought about that and thought about how music's role might intertwine with the role of the orca in the film as a bridge between man and nature.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, those are great stories. I love hearing that. And when I read the script, I mean, I knew immediately that sound would have an incredible impact on the story. I couldn't help but also think about, you know, the stories I'd heard about how Ifukube had used gloves on bass strings to create the roar and those sort of footsteps with drums and stuff. Like there's just such a crazy history of taking musical instruments to make sound then becoming musical, and both of them having a narrative function. And I felt like Doherty was tapping into that with the idea of the orca. The very fundamental story of King of the Monsters was exploring that. So that was definitely at the forefront of my mind, and a lot of the sound design that I did in the music. We were conscious and working together with the sound teams to make sure that we weren't stepping on each other's toes. I mean, a lot of it was collaboration, but a lot of it was also like carving out space for each of these components of film to do their job.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was good because I was going to say on that. From what you just said, like, do you tend to make that like an important aspect of what you do to sort of kind of hook up with whoever's doing the sound design and just sort of kind of pick their brain to kind of maybe map out where you know things are going to be very loud, so that kind of just informs the way you're going to write in a certain point of the movie?
For sure. I mean, I always like to I work with everybody whose job affects mine. So picture editorial and sound effects especially. I mean, aside from just interfacing with the director, those are the other teams that I spend a lot of time talking to. And you know, in the case of King of the Monsters, it was almost like any experience I had doing that kind of collaboration. At a certain point, we were both sort of throwing up our hands, because it was like the sound guys are like, dude, our characters are like, I don't know what to tell you about the sound other than it's going to be the most massive thing ever. And then I would say, I don't know what to tell you other than this is the most epic thing ever. So I'm just going to like go for it. And they're saying, I'm just going to go for it. And in a way, it's like we duked it out at the mix, you know? And that's fine. I mean, sometimes that happens. There have been other times where a philosophy, I mean, again, you know, like back on Battlestar Galactica, the philosophy of the sound design was when we're outside in space, originally it was there's no sound, as there is no sound in space. That became too literal. The sound effects, if you watch that show, are very muted. It's like the high pass has been rolled off.
Yeah.
And as a result, I was like, oh, when we're on an exterior, I can do more with my drums. Like there was a conscious effort that we were carving out space for each other. But in King of the Monsters, I mean, when your characters are this big, it's like, and we're not mixing it for TV. We're mixing it for, a theatrical experience. So that was sort of the fun of it, is like everybody's going for it. And it's like, let's see what survives at the mix,
So I imagine the dubbing process was probably a lot of fun then.
Oh, for sure. It was fun. It was heartbreaking. It was exhilarating. I mean, there's definitely cues where it's just like, okay, you know what I mean? Like all the detail that I know is there. But it's a trade-off. It makes it worthwhile because then when the sound effects do back off and the music takes over, it has an incredible impact. It was a crazy experience.
Because I was going to say specifically the rebirth scene. The music was front and center there. I mean, that was a great moment in the trailer, or not in the movie, but it was also the first thing we saw kind of in the pre-release stuff in the trailers and in the posters. But so an interesting thing is, like, Akira Ifukube was known for his use of alternating and kind of interesting time signatures. And as it turns out, for the new themes that you composed specifically for King Ghidorah, you use an interesting time signature for King Ghidorah. So let's talk about that theme.
Yeah. So I suppose I should step back, and just say that, like, the decision was made early on to make the themes, but to use the old themes. But there was also this sense that, like, we have to make what works best for the movie. And in a way, it was sort of a battle royale to the death of theme versus theme. And that scene you talk about with Godzilla rising up out of the ocean, that was the one when I was pitching to Mike and the studio. I go, look, if we're going to make this work and use the old Godzilla theme, here's how we're going to do it. And I showed them that scene, and it was essentially what you saw in the final. And I remember, like, the lights came up at the end of that scene, and nobody said anything. And I thought, oh my God, like, did I mess up? I look over at Mike. Got tears pouring down his face. Then I look over at the producers, and they're just thinking about, like the wallet. And one of the producers I don't remember who it was. Somebody goes, well, guess we're calling Toho.
Was that a pretty straightforward process? I mean, was there a plan B in the event that getting the rights to do the old themes was difficult? Or
it was a crazy process. No, it was not straightforward. Props go to Legendary Warners for making it happen. Peter Afterman, the music super, Toho, everybody wanted to make this happen. But part of the thing with music licensing for picture is, what are you licensing? How are you using it? Where are you using it? How often are you using it? So it was this constant sort of tug of war where at the end, Toho would say, all right, what are you guys doing? And the music super would be like, I don't know, we haven't done it yet. And okay, you get the scene when he's coming up out of the ocean. Does that work? Do you use it in other places? But I mean, I'll tell you guys, I was in London on the stage. We were money being spent. I'm recording. And there were certain cues we didn't know we were going to have. And I had backups. They were ready to go. And it was like on the third day, I came back and Mike's like, we got Mothra. And then I was like, take those last 3 cues and throw them in the paper shredder. Like, I never want to hear them again.
I was about to say, no, don't do that. But
okay. So to get to all of that was preamble, right? Yeah. Ghidorah, I had this idea. It was like burning a hole in my brain. That I was struck by the imagery of threes. I mean, he's like and really Mike leans into the biblical imagery. I mean, he's not a lot of the sort of, I mean, there's an homage, right? Is he from another planet? Yes. But the narrative function the spiritual function in King of the Monsters is he's the devil. Okay, he's the devil, and he's like this unholy trinity. You know, like we're getting into the Omen, great kind of like divine evil kind of things. So I was like, look, the old school Ghidorah themes are cool, but I just was like, Mike, I got to try this thing where it's all about the number 3. And I took patterns of 3, grouped them in 3s, took those patterns and grouped them in 3s. So you had these like spirals in 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And then I set that into chants, and we got these Japanese Buddhist monks to come in and chant these hypnotic vocals. And that worked so well that, like I say, when it was a battle royale, I wrote a Godzilla theme during sketching, and we all knew it's like, it's not the same. But the Ghidorah one, I won the battle royale because it's like, in this case for this film, that theme I think resonated, with Mike. And I certainly hope it resonated with audiences. I mean, I don't mean to say that the other themes aren't great. They were awesome, all the historical Ghidorah themes, but for the way that he was functioning in this story, something about those Japanese Buddhist monks really clicked.
So, kind of sticking with that, and I'm sorry, is it the Kakegoe? Yes. Kakegoe performers, and if I have this correct, these are percussionists, but the percussion that they give you was a different kind. It wasn't their normal instrument per se.
Well, we had so much fun because I use a lot of taiko drums. I've recorded a bunch of taiko drums myself. I know a lot of great players around the world, having done Battlestar Galactica and PlayStation games that have used it. And I've had a lot of experience with Japanese music. However, one of the things that's the most exciting when you see a taiko ensemble, the most famous is probably Kodo, K-O-D-O. Part of the way this music is performed is there's a vocalization component. There's a lead vocalist who will send out signals, chants, grunts, various vocalizations. The crowd, meaning the ensemble, will replicate those. Very much a call and response kind of work song aesthetic and function. Like they have a functional role. What are the drums doing? The shouting is how they figure that out. And so what I wanted to do for King of the Monsters is channel that energy, but separate it from the function and technically separate it from the drums. I brought in a taiko ensemble, a professional taiko ensemble. They came in, if you look up the videos on YouTube, they're in their outfits, everything. They look so badass.
They were completely on point. And
no drums. They didn't even bring them. I told them, like, we're not playing anything. It's all the vocals. I want you guys to chant in isolation the vocalizations that you do. So we did that for a couple hours. And then I was like, can we do some other stuff? Can you chant, without being too on the nose about what we were recording, because everything was NDA'd, Gojira, Masuda.
Did they figure it out at that point? Or
absolutely. And interestingly, I was like, can we do Rodan? And they all went, you mean Radon? And I was like, no, I mean Rodan. No. And then I fell down a little rabbit hole. It's like, oh my God,
Radon.
It is Radon. So yes, we'll do it both. And what ended up in the film was the Rodan, because it was obviously geared toward American audiences. But the last thing, we had like 3 minutes left. And I was like, I had this idea brewing. I hadn't done it yet, but I was like, can you guys chant "Go Go Godzilla" for me?
Well, that's something we're going to get to. But you were just speaking of Rodan, so I have a question for you. How much were the horn players' lips hurting after they got finished playing Rodan's theme?
It was brutal. I wrote for Rodan's theme. It was essentially just the French horns screaming, ripping up to their highest register. And, I had arranged the session order such that we would start off with a couple Rodin cues, and like I placed them very surgically, like, oh, the French horn players will warm up for an hour, we'll do a cue, and you know, I won't do any of them in the afternoon because they'll have blown their lips out, but I won't front load them because they'll blow their lips out before the rest of the score.
And then they won't be able to perform it when it comes time to.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an endurance thing. I mean, and believe me, I've been in many sessions. You get 2 or 3 of those. And the players in London, you guys, I mean, I had 8 players ripping up to that high F consistently over and over and over. They nailed it almost every time. They got it so often that at the end of the sessions, we did a second pass and panned them hard left and right, because the French horns are, you know, to me, they're off to the left.
Yeah.
And I was like, can we just record them all again? Flip the panning so that when you hear the French horns, you have 8 over here, and it's as if you had 8 over there.
Yeah.
And we did it. You know, it took the session time, but they nailed it. So I was blown away. I really thought we would end up getting 2 or 3 good takes and sampling it around, but no, it's legit. You are hearing the real deal. Not only are they doing it once, they're doing it twice.
And as you're writing that music for Rodin and requiring the horn players to play so hard, obviously there's a reason for that in your characterization of the monster of Rodin. So in your mind, when you were requiring the horn players, for example, to play so hard going, what was your thinking behind that?
Again, I keep going back to the analogy of real estate, but I think of a film as like, you know, there's real estate. There's room over here. Godzilla gets a mansion, you know. Rodin was the character with the smallest real estate. There's only a couple of scenes. Those scenes are louder than God, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no, you only have these micro moments. I can't go dun 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 dun. Oh, the scene's over, you know, or the moment is over. So I was looking at like, okay, what are my real moments? You know, he bursts out of the volcano. He's spreading his wings. I kept going like, I've got this like, it's like a second. And I was starting to think maybe the theme isn't a melody. It's like a sound. It's an exclamation. It's just a scream. And I combined that with a rhythmic motor in this iteration. And again, it should sort of go without saying for hardcore fans that, you know, the Rodin theme is my own creation. Of the 4 monsters, used classic themes on 2. My theme ended up on 2 of them. And this is another reason why, where the Rodin theme had very little space. I had room for those bursting screams in the French horns. And then otherwise I used Latin percussion.
Yeah, I noticed that like when he starts chasing the Argo, you get that
totally. And it's like straight up like South American, Central American drums. Because in this iteration, he's like the fire god of the ancient Americas, which is a different spin. And I kind of wanted to honor that.
You know, it's very interesting, if I could just interject real quick, one thing, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, but when I heard that Rodin theme, and keeping in mind that in King of the Monsters, Rodin is from Mexico, emerging from a volcano in Mexico, the way you wrote those horns, that really kind of strident, biting horns, it reminded me of a Mexican composer called Silvestre Revueltas.
I don't know, but I'm gonna look him up.
And when I heard that music, I thought, my gosh, that sounds like Revuelta, because he was also a film composer, but he had this tendency to write these really biting, strident horn brass passages that and I thought to myself, I wonder if he researched Mexican composers when he was writing music that takes place in Mexico. I mean, I wasn't assuming that you had, but I thought maybe there's a chance. But you should check it out because he's an amazing composer.
I will, and really, like I find that in Latin music, in Brazilian music, in South American music, that there tends to be this very aggressive kind of, like heavy, fast percussion that's got this really cool groove, and then these punctuations very often by brass instruments. And I did not think about that at all until you said it, but now that you're saying it, it's like, that's definitely a well I was drawing from. So there were sort of like the stars all aligned, and that, for Rodin's theme, that really was born more from a need to fit that function. you know. But then I found it's like, oh, there's a really cool theme in there, and when he comes back at the end of the film, I'm going to bring that back.
What something really cool, Bear, really quickly, because we're talking about recording in London, and I believe you also recorded in China as well, according to the liner notes.
Yeah,
in the booklet.
we did stuff in Shanghai and Tokyo as well too.
So Godzilla was a worldwide score, but I mean, you're recording at Air Studios, which is a renowned scoring stage. And I have to tell you something really funny. So earlier when I got done with David Arnold and we ended the live broadcast, I stayed on to talk with him for another few minutes and everything, and just thank him and stuff. And he asked me, he's like, "Oh yeah, so what else is coming up today?" And I mentioned you, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he I believe he did use the Ifukube theme." I'm doing a terrible British accent, but he had mentioned that he was actually having his lunch outside Air Studios. He wasn't sure if you knew it, but he said he took a little bit of a listen to you. He was there when your sessions were going on. He was just kind of out and about. So
that's cool. I love hearing that. And of course, we're pals on Facebook. I don't know him very well, but obviously have a tremendous respect for what he did, and loved his Godzilla score, especially when I was growing up. I mean, I just thought it was a knockout. And I love that you got a chance to talk with him on this.
He was wonderful. Great. He was great. But so with London musicians, John Williams always kind of used to say stuff about like how London brass had a certain sound, and like he used to work with like Maurice Murphy, obviously, who is no longer with us. But what do you find as far as, is there any like difference on your end from recording in LA versus recording at Air in London?
The short answer is no. I mean, the longer answer is absolutely. There's nuance there, but I just want to make clear to everybody listening that is not a composer. Yeah. We are now getting into the most expensive Ferrari and the most expensive Lamborghini, and going like, what's the difference? and it's on that level. Like, it really is. I've recorded all over the world. I've recorded in all throughout Europe. I've recorded in Nashville. I've recorded in Seattle. But most of my work is in London. Oh, Iceland. They were great. But when you're talking about London and LA, it's head and shoulders above everybody else. And it gets into very specific esoteric details. And I'll tell you that it's really more about the rooms than anything else. I mean, I can't really say the London brass are better than LA or vice versa. However, I can say this. The first time I recorded at the Sony scoring stage in Los Angeles, which is the largest stage in LA, I'm going to go out on a limb and say in America. I was doing a movie called Step Up 3D, a Disney hip hop dance movie. And so I'm doing all the romantic underscoring cues. And I'd worked at Warner Brothers and a lot of other stages, and I get up on the podium and I'm like, okay, cool, I'll record at Sony. I start doing, it's a little cue about two high schoolers falling in love. It starts, I almost start weeping on the podium because my brain, I've been doing film music now professionally for, at that point, maybe eight years or so. But suddenly it sounded like John Williams, you guys. It sounded like John Williams. It was like that room. It just was the
Sony scoring.
It was the flute solo. I was like, oh my God, it's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I almost started, I wanted to die. And then I was like, oh my God. And I've worked there a lot. And I had the same thing happen in London. The first time I worked there was on God of War. And I got up there, I'm like, okay, cool. And I started conducting. And again, I almost started weeping because I was like, oh my God, all those scores. For me, especially, it was these James Horner scores in the 90s. Yeah. The sound of the strings, the way they blend. Again, apologies for the nerdy, like Ferrari level.
No, this is what we want to go. This is a
but it's like the
here.
Sound. Like I've written these like faux James Horner lines my whole life, and I always thought I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. He had some magic I don't understand. No, I do understand. It was just in air in London. I had the engineer he used, and suddenly it's like, oh, it sounds like those 90s James Horner scores I grew up on. And it was just, again, I was overcome with emotion. So that's the level, that's the kind of like emotional impact you can have, the experience you can have. But it's really, the details are ultimately very esoteric. The scores are going to sound great wherever you go. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say most audiences aren't going to pick up on those kinds of differences. But, for people with an ear, the people that love soundtracks, and especially for people that spend their life living in the shadow of these amazing composers, you're always trying to figure out, how do they do it? How do they do it? How do they do it?
So just kind of sticking with that for just one brief second, do you ever, if you know that you're going to go record at Air or you're going to record on the Sony stage, does that affect your writing at all? Do you ever write, because you just mentioned, the magic of James Horner, but then you're like, oh, it could be just the strings, the way the room sounds. So do you ever write for the room?
Not really. And I'll tell you why. When I write, I talk about, I've mentioned James Horner. I think about Basil Polidorus and John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Ennio Morricone. It's really these composers that had this effect on me between the ages of 5 and 15. That's in my, it is in my DNA. It's in my soul. The only way I can write music is to revert to this childlike state. All I'm saying, and I imagine it's like, oh, it reminds me of Conan the Barbarian, or reminds me of Star Trek 2, or reminds me of To Kill a Mockingbird. From there, once the idea is out, there are ways you can get it to sound a little better, a little closer to those visions. But it's not even possible for me to even think about the room yet, because in essence, I'm 13 again when I write. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm just sort of like, this movie is the awesomest thing ever. And I'm just lost in it. I'm in the emotion. Sometimes I'm crying when I'm writing. It's real. If I don't feel it, I can't make you feel it, So that's why I say, a lot of the details about how you make music, you discover when you either become a hardcore soundtrack fan or you attempt to write music. But I think for my hope is the casual listener won't know the difference. They won't know. They'll hopefully enough of my idea will translate through, no matter where it's recorded. It's recorded in a bedroom. Child's Play was recorded right here, and I didn't have any. It was just, it was practically a bedroom score.
Using kind of like an orchestra of kids' toys and stuff.
Of toys, yeah. But the intention translated. The production value wasn't great, but that was part of the intention. So yeah, it's just an interesting experience, and I try to keep perspective on that. That you want as long as the core idea is genuine and emotional and raw, how it's produced matters, but not as much as the core idea.
So obviously, for those of you out there that don't know, Bear studied under one of the greatest film composers of all time, the late, great Elmer Bernstein. Bear, I have a question. So when you were kind of learning from Mr. Bernstein at USC, I believe it was, right? What did you learn about the role of the orchestrator, and how has that role changed in the era where we have MIDI now and you have MIDI transcribers? And I certainly don't know what your process is. For all I know, you put pencil to paper, but by and large, it just seems like a lot of composers, just for the speed and for how quickly you have to get these compositions done, they tend to really make use of just MIDI and digital performer and stuff. So what is your perspective on that?
There's a lot to dig into there. I'm going to try to keep it brief. A few things about me. I was born in 1979. I'm 41 years old. And I am very much a product of being born that exact year. If I had been born any earlier, I would be a pencil and paper guy for sure. And I would have struggled the way they all struggled dealing with technology as it changed in the 80s and 90s and changed everything about the way film music is done.
Yeah.
However, I also grew up listening to nothing but classical orchestral composers. Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, James Horner. They were my heroes. Some of them my heroes weren't. Danny Elfman, even Hans Zimmer. At the time, I didn't know, they weren't trained, but they were the next generation. But by and large, I grew up worshiping orchestral music.
Yeah.
So I never wrote pencil and paper. I got a computer when I was 10, 11, maybe. And so I I met Elmer when I was 16, and was very fortunate to meet him through completely random circumstances. And he heard some of my music, and he basically said, you got to be this tall to get on the ride. I asked him, how do you become a film composer? Well, have you studied orchestration? Nope. Counterpoint? I don't even know what that is. Composition, music history, theory. I'm just like, I write stuff on my MIDI keyboard and play in a rock band in my high school. Conducting, he was just basically like, you got to learn all these things. And I was like, of course I got to learn all these things because all my heroes know these things. Elmer was wrong. Okay, he was wrong. That would have been 1995, 1996. You did not need to know those things. Hans Zimmer had just won his Academy Award.
For Lion
Danny
King,
Elfman was well into his career. Mark Mothersbaugh, and then soon these doors would be blown wide open with Trent Reznor. You have Terrence Blanchard coming from jazz. I mean,
and as I found out today, David Arnold also not classically trained.
Well, there you go. I wouldn't have guessed that just because his orchestral music is so solid.
Yeah.
But that's my point. It's not about your background. But Elmer was coming from the era where it was.
Yes.
So as a result, I studied all that stuff. I came down here to go to USC. He wrote a letter for me to get in, which I'm sure helped. But I mean, I studied all of that stuff. I conduct my own music. I am capable of orchestrating my own music. I didn't get a degree in film scoring. I got a degree in classical composition. So in a weird way, I am this historical anomaly in that, to go back to the year I was born, while I was doing all that, I was still writing only on computers. As samples became things, I dove right into that. I was playing in rock bands, and exploring both of these things completely equally. And I think that has had a huge impact on my success in my career. So Elmer, even what I learned from Elmer was about the art. What I learned from Elmer was about how you talk with a filmmaker. That hasn't changed. How you approach narrative, how you approach drama, that hasn't changed at all. And in many ways, at this point in my career, I've interfaced with a lot of aspiring composers. I bring on interns. I've trained a lot of aspiring composers myself. I brought a lot of people under my wing. I am a little amazed at how much I learned from Elmer that is just not being taught today, and it's important to understand what samples can do. And God, I'm glad there are like millennials on my staff that know what they can do now. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like Elmer was teaching me the basics of dramatic musical storytelling that ultimately are the only thing that matter. How you get there is how you get there.
Yeah, it's always kind of been said that dramatic chops are more important than musical chops when it comes to film scoring.
I would go even a step further and say you are a filmmaker first.
Yep.
And a composer second. With that said, I've really done my work to become a composer. But when I talk with a filmmaker, I am putting that hat on. And
sure.
Then when I get in front of an orchestra, I'm writing, I'm in the musical world. But if you're not 100% comfortable talking about film, then you really can't do your job.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Bear. I think in interviews you often talk about your influences in the world of film music. Elmer Bernstein, of course, being one of them. But in the world of classical music, the great composers, who are some of your influences there?
Immediately, I got to say Debussy and Ravel. The Ravel String Quartet is still just so beautiful. It kills me. It's so beautiful. Stravinsky, Prokofiev. The kind of early and mid 20th century Russian composers, and really, who am I talking about? I'm talking about the composers that influenced film composers. I'm talking about the composers that when the layperson hears them, then they're like, "That's Star Wars." It's like, no, it's not. It's Stravinsky. You know what I mean? Like
it's the Rite of Spring. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really, they the works that they did. Are incredible. I definitely grew up immersed in film, but those are the composers that mean the most to me. I mean, my wife and I named our daughter after a Ravel composition. So, you know what I mean? Like, there's that.
Well, would you, Ravel was one of Akira Ifukube's favorite composers, actually.
It's fantastic. My favorite Ravel story is that he always wanted. The funny thing about the film world and film pop world and classical is they've always had this grass is always greener mentality. They've always wanted what the other one had. There's been resentment on both sides. I mean, it's been 100 years of tension, really. Maybe not quite close to 100 since there were talkies, but no, you know what? It goes even back to musical theater. But here's my point. Now that era is finally ending. People that do film can do classical music. People that do classical music can do film. The borders have dissolved. But my favorite story about Ravel is that he, I don't know the exact quotes, but that George Gershwin, at the height of his career, tracked him down. You know, and this is, we can assume he's writing American in Paris, Rhapsody in Blue. He's trying to be legit, even though he's the most famous songwriter alive, probably one of the most rich musicians alive. He wants that validation. So he goes to Ravel. You know, the story is he knocks on the door and it's like, I want you to teach me composition. And Ravel just looks at him and says some variation of, I want you to teach me composition, you know?
So I guess you kind of just said it, because I was going to ask you, like, you know, what kind of sort of attitudes and essential qualities make it possible to thrive in such a business like Hollywood in general, much less Hollywood film scoring?
That's a really good question. And I love that you worded it that way, as opposed to the more general purpose, like what does it take or how do you get in or whatever? Because you said attitude, and that really is where it is where it starts. I'm fortunate in that for the early part of my career, maybe not the later part, but the early part of my career, I was sort of hardwired with an attitude that was very beneficial to me. When I was a teenager and moving into college and shortly thereafter, I just loved film music so much. It was my religion, and to a degree, I was a zealot. It's all I wanted. Extremist. I am. It's all I wanted to do. It's all I did with my time in high school. I just wrote music in the style of my heroes. I wasn't really a zealot in that I didn't care what anybody else did, but I took this very seriously. And when I came to USC, the first thing I did was track down filmmakers. I just want to score student films. And I just did that and did that and did that and did that. I never cared how much I got paid. I never cared that I could pay anybody else. I would just ask everybody I knew, would you play on my film score? And in the process of doing that, over the course of my 4 or 5 years at USC, I ended up doing student films where by the time I was done, I was doing live orchestra, 60 or 70 players. Oh. The budget for this was $250 for pizza. Because I would ask everyone in the music school. I would make 500 phone calls to get 70 people. But I just didn't care because it was fun. I loved it. It was amazing. Yeah. And at a certain point into the first season of Battlestar Galactica, when I was like, when it settled down enough that I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? What's happening? Somebody's paying me to do this now. This is insane. The reason I bring that up is that to be enthusiastic, to be passionate, to love to collaborate with people, to look at every single thing as an opportunity to have fun and do something and move toward your dream. For a while, that was really beneficial for me, you know, and I didn't approach it with any kind of cynicism. So I think that kind of attitude is really helpful. I mean, to word it another way, if you're living your life such that you are going to write music for a narrative, whether someone pays you or not, whether you pay your bills or not, you kind of reach that point where you go, am I okay if I'm living under a bridge and I get to do this? And you go, yeah, I actually am. I am okay with that. I feel like that kind of passion does not go unrewarded. No. Because it also means, like, look, I'm not the most talented person. I just worked my ass off for like starting at age 7 and really at like age 12, I started doing this nonstop. So you have that attitude, you have that passion, it translates into a work ethic. You put in your 10,000 hours, you're just gonna get better at it. There's no shortcut, but
sure.
You know what I mean? Does any of that resonate? You know what I'm trying to say?
It absolutely does. And another interesting thing, just to kind of, really quickly as we're getting towards the end of our time here, there's been like, as far as attitudes go, there have been attitudes about general trends in film scoring, many of which have been influenced by the quote unquote Hans Zimmer sound since Gladiator. And people sort of tend to worry, well, are woodwinds going to fall out of favor, or is this or that? Like, where do you see things trending? Because I would like to think that orchestral film music is never going to go away. I hope it never does. I hope there's always going to be a need for it.
It's an interesting question. Every time something has a huge impact, usually a film in a broad sense, the music associated with it, tends to be in demand. The reality is producers often don't know what good music is. They do know that what Gladiator sounded like, and they want their movie to sound like Gladiator.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a reality. So in that way, what can happen? Anything can happen. Who knows? If Child's Play had been a runaway billion-dollar movie, it might be like every movie has toy pianos and Mark Hamill singing in it. I don't know. But no, the other thing that happens is you get this 30-year nostalgia window, where something that was genuinely modern and badass 30 years ago kind of comes back in a way that is retro, kitschy. Like, what's weird is like, but maybe it's not. I mean, I did a score for a movie called Rim of the World for Netflix. Yeah. Straight up homage to Jerry Goldsmith adventure kid scores in the 80s. Like straight up. Like
Explorers type of deal.
Explorers, E.T., Inner Space, The Burbs, Goonies, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of like, was it an homage? Or is it just what I think is cool? I actually don't know, like, where that line. But it's like I've got woodwinds all over the place. You know what I mean?
And I think that, like, John Williams, he basically said, what he did on Star Wars was more or less, he called it pastiche. But
it was not new at all. I mean, talk about the 30-year nostalgia window.
Yeah. King's Row. Listen to King's Row next to the main title. But it's look what it's done, and that's why I brought that up, because you talked about that nostalgia window. But obviously, things. I really hope that's where things stay. I mean, because like I just said, like, I love the way woodwinds sound. Brass is pretty much here to stay. I think that the symphony orchestra tends to just be one of the greatest inventions we've ever had. So
there are some absolutely wonderful colors in there, and certainly I don't think, people always want something that's different. They always want something that, like, what I'm saying is, as things move forward, the number of colors is going to expand. Mm-hmm. I really don't think it's going to contract, because it just creates more and more tools at your disposal. And so that'll be interesting, to see how it evolves.
Well, Bear, I hope you're one of the guys that's helping it evolve. I really want to. Yeah, I really want to thank you so much for joining us today. This was so enjoyable for you to take the time to just kind of talk about these things we love, music and monsters. And you've done, not only just with Godzilla, but the film with the poster that's right behind you, Blaster Beam. Loved hearing that come back. So thank you for that. But but really, Bear, thank you so much. Yeah. This was just a joy. And just thank you for your time. And I also want to really thank your team. I want to thank Joe Augustine and Marisa Gunzenhauser. I emailed her to get a correct pronunciation of her name, and your tech Miki, because they really worked hard to help us make this happen. You've got a great crew, Bear, and you're a great person and a great artist. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's an honor.
So with that, our panel with Bear McCreary will come to a close, and stick around because we'll be right back with another Godzilla composer, our friend Michiru Oshima. So stay tuned to Kaiju Masterclass. Thank you.